Welcome back to the shop. This week we're going to be talking about the KTM 950 and I want to kind of compare it to the KLR650. Why would I compare these two? Simply because if you're in the market for a brand new KLR650, you might be surprised to see what you could get for the same money in the used market in terms of a KTM 950. And if you look at these two, I think a lot of people that are shopping for one would be very interested to know that the other is an option that is available to them. I'm sure I will get plenty of comments about how or why the KTM is not a direct comparison. Be sure to leave them in the comments below. It sparks conversation, so that's not a bad thing. But I do want to make this comparison because John, who went on the Trans-Wisconsin ride with us, he recently purchased a KTM 950, and I want to thank him because he was nice enough to let me ride it and review it for this video. I did do some onboard feedback, but unfortunately I had a problem with the audio, so I'll be editing those clips in and then talking about the experience of riding that while we're going through this video. But he bought a 950 in very, very clean condition for, I believe it was $6,500. If that's wrong, John, if you're watching this, please put in the comments below exactly what it was, but I believe it was $6,500. And at $6,500, the KTM 950 really, I think, presents a huge bargain for anybody in the market. The KTM 950 was the predecessor to the 990, and certainly the first difference that I'll call out between the 950 and the 990 is that the 950 is carbureted and the 990 is fuel injected, and that does reveal itself not so much in terms of cold starting, because the 950 cold started just fine, but really more in terms of the transition from just off idle to mid-range throttle response. It's a little more abrupt on the carbureted version. The 990 is definitely smoother. However, the 990s tend to go for a little bit more, and I don't think people that are in the market for something like a KLR650 would consider spending that additional money for the 990. So I do think that the 950 is the best side-by-side comparison for somebody who might be considering buying a brand new KLR650. Making the comparison between these two bikes certainly is night and day in terms of the capabilities. The KLR650 is obviously a fantastic bike. I've owned them. I've put together reviews on those in the past. If you haven't seen those, be sure to check out our other videos on those. But the 950 is just a completely different league than a KLR, and thanks to depreciation, can be had for similar prices to a new one. Now, obviously, there are advantages to buying new versus used, but again, this particular 950 that I rode was in immaculate shape and very great condition, and I think was a real bargain for that $6,500 price range. Much like the 990, as soon as I jumped on the 950, the same feeling of how narrow the motorcycle is and how much it feels like a very off-road oriented motorcycle, which is what it is. That same low-down grunt that I described on the 990 was apparent also in the 950. Again, there is a big difference in terms of the throttle response as you transition from off-idle to mid-range. There's a little bit of a gap there where it's abrupt as you make that transition from off-idle to mid-range. That might be able to be smoothed out further with some jetting or something like that. But again, I'm giving you my feedback based on the particular bike that I rode. The problem with the one in particular that I rode is that the previous owner had the handlebars rolled way back. So it really impacted my ability to assess the motorcycle fully in an off-road condition because the riding position was completely out of whack. It just was not very well oriented to standing up. It did not feel like the 990. Now, we did make an adjustment and simply roll the bars forward, and if that still isn't enough, a set of bar risers would certainly solve this problem, and I'll have to check back with the owner of the 990 that I rode, and I can't remember whether or not he had bar risers on it. If he did, that definitely makes a big difference in the riding position, and I'm not personally one that puts bar risers on very many motorcycles, but the 950 in particular might need them, especially if you're a taller rider. Now, I didn't get an opportunity to ride the bike again after we made the handlebar adjustments. The owner of the motorcycle rode it. He said he noticed an immediate difference in just rolling those bars forward. But again, if that's still not good enough, then a set of bar risers would certainly fix that riding position. The 950 shares the same, exciting characteristics as the 990 in terms of the sound of the engine. Those V-twins with the dual pipes just sound really, really good. Once again, the suspension on the 950 was certainly not on par with like my 1090, and it felt about similar to the 990. So it is an area that if you were going to be buying one, you would probably, again, want to send it out to someone and get it sprung for your weight. But that's a very easy modification to do after the fact, and it's not very expensive. So really, I think what makes the 950 such an appealing proposition is that on the used market, thanks to depreciation, they are relatively cheap, and it does definitely carry with it that same feel that even the newer KTM 990s and the 1090 that I have with them, which is just a raw sense of excitement, an exhilarating experience, which, having owned and ridden KLR650s, you just don't get that from a KLR. And I'm sorry, I know the KLR fans are just going to rip me apart for this, but it is what it is. The KLR is a great bike, but the 950 is just in a different league, and on the used market, they're about the same price. So personally, I think if you're in this market, you might really want to consider looking around for a really nice, clean example of a 950. That carburation shaves a lot of the price out, which puts it down into that price range of something like a new KLR650. And I don't think you're sacrificing a lot relative to the 990. Certainly, the 990 felt more refined. The 990 felt smoother on that throttle response because of the fuel injection. And if you live at altitude, or if you're transitioning in and out of altitudes, then it might be worth splurging and going with the 990, which is fuel injected. However, if you can just live with the carburation and deal with having to use a choke, I think the 950 is a fantastic bike. It did feel very, very similar to the 990 when I rode that one. Same things there in terms of pros and cons. The cons are really just around the carburation, which, if you consider it a con, I think it's livable, so that's not too big of a deal. The softer suspension is probably more of the issue that I would see with a 950 or even the 990. But again, that's a quick, easy fix in the aftermarket if you go to a suspension expert and get it set up for your weight. The 950 really has some very, very distinct advantages over the KLR in every aspect. First and foremost, even with the suspension that's not on par with a 1090, that suspension that is on the 950 is still much, much better than what comes on a KLR650. Now, I know the KLR650 is getting discontinued, so maybe this comparison is all irrelevant. But bear with me, because if you are looking to buy one of the last KLR650s, this is still something that you might want to consider. Off-road, it definitely handles much like a dirt bike. Same comments that I've had about the 990 and the same comments that I have about my 1090 is just how easy these bikes are to ride standing up in off-road conditions, weight the pegs, do your steering with the foot pegs. They just balance themselves really, really well. This applies again to the 950. The 950 does come with rubber inserts in the foot pegs. The owner of this one did remove them, and the stock foot pegs I think are decent for off-road. However, I would still recommend putting a larger set of foot pegs on there. I have those rally style on my 1090, and I think they would do worlds of difference for the 950 as well, just because with that extra leverage on both sides, it'll make it even easier to steer with the pegs and weight each side to counterbalance. So that's definitely an upgrade that I think I would recommend to anybody who does buy one of these. Again, the bike felt very, very similar to the 990 in terms of the sound. It's a very intoxicating sound. I said this about the 990, and the 950 is the same way. There is something about these bikes with those twin pipes that they just sound really, really good. It puts a huge grin on my face every time I ride one of these, and I just think it's an exciting aspect to these motorcycles. They just sound like an animal, and they sound dramatically different than my 1090 does. In fact, I like the sound a little bit better on both the 950 and the 990s. Now, on the 1090, that might get solved with an aftermarket exhaust. So all things considered, I was really happy to have the riding experience on the 950. I think it is a fantastic motorcycle, and I think especially for the money, given that depreciated value, I think for $6,500, if you're looking for an adventure bike, you would be very, very hard-pressed to find a better bang for buck than a nice, clean example of one of these 950s. You'll notice through the shots in this video that this example that I rode was a very, very clean example, and I just don't think you can do much better than that in that price range. In $6,500 price ranges, your options are going to be relatively limited. I think these are really good bikes. I think they're getting old enough now where they're starting to really depreciate because there's been so many iterations in between there. But I think that works in your favor as a buyer on the used market because there are quite a few of them available. You can negotiate and get that price down. And I think if you do, you're going to find that you wind up with a really, really nice bike, one that you're going to be really happy with for a long time. And if you spend just a little bit of money in the aftermarket space, you're going to get it fixed up and it will really be on par with a lot of these newer, more expensive motorcycles that are on the market and are good options today. So hopefully some of you found this video interesting. If you did, be sure to give this video a great big thumbs up. If you haven't already, be sure to click that subscribe button. And I want to take a quick moment and thank all of our existing subscribers. We are quickly approaching, and by the time this video gets posted, we might even hit 1,000 subscribers, which is a huge milestone for us, and that is thanks to all of you. Another few quick notes is after the trip to Indiana, I will have a little bit of updates on the Chevy Colorado Duramax, which I covered in previous videos. We've towed with it. It hauled both the 1090 and the 950 all the way down to Indiana and back, so I'll share some of that experience with you guys in a subsequent video. If you have specific topics that you'd like to see covered on this channel, please be sure to comment in the section below and we will read those. We will get back to you and we will try to cover those topics. We also have the continuation of our GPS series coming up, and with the riding season coming to an end, I should finally get some more time to do some editing on the Colorado BDR footage. So as always, I want to thank all of you very much for watching and subscribing and building this channel. Hopefully you liked this 950 review, and as always, take care and ride safe.